I need a motion to approve the agenda tonight. Councillor Sherwood and Councillor Stevens, was there any questions about the items on the agenda? Call the vote. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Was there any disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we are going to be heading into a closed session. The recommendation is that a closed meeting of council be held pursuant to section 239-2 of the Municipal Act for purposes of considering the following subject matter, which is a confidential verbal report from Karen Landry, Acting General Manager of Corporate Services, and Colleen Butler, Town Solicitor. Can I have a motion to go into closed, please? Councillor McIntosh and Councillor Andrews, any questions? All in favor? Carried unanimously. We will head into closed. p.m. We're going to begin this meeting with the singing of our national anthem. So for those who are able, please rise.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you, everyone. We would like to acknowledge the treaty lands and territory of the Williams Treaty Nations and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also recognize that Dufferin County is the traditional territory of the Wendat and Haudenosaunee and is home to many Indigenous people today. This meeting is being aired on public television and/or streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of this meeting. Any member of the public who is connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. Please remain muted until the chair requests comments or questions from the public. We do have a rise in report. That confidential report, verbal report from Karen Landry, Acting General Manager, Corporate Services, and Colleen Butler, Town Solicitor, regarding the vaccine policy regarding personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, be received. Can I have a motion, please? Deputy Mayor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Andrews. Any questions or comments? I'll call the vote, please. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. We have a motion in here to adopt the minutes of the previous council meeting, which is for the 9th of January. If I could have a motion. Deputy Mayor, and seconded by Councillor Sherwood. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Do you need a moment, Mona, for sound? We're a bit echoey. Okay. Okay, so up first we have Quentin Hanchard, Chief Administrative Officer from the Credit Valley Conservation Authority. If you can come forward to the delegation table, please.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'm actually dialing in remotely this evening.
I got you now. I see you. Thank you. Over to you. We're ready for you when you're ready to go.
Thank you very much. I'm just waiting for the presentation to come up, and thank you again for taking the time. Just while we're waiting, I just wanted to say firstly, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate having the opportunity to come and present our 2023 budget. And I know you've got a lot on the agenda this evening, so I'll try to be swift about moving through it. And just to the clerk, I'm happy to share the presentation from my side if that's best.
Madam Clerk?
Yes, please go ahead and share your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again. Just if you wouldn't mind just confirming for me, if you could please, that you can see the presentation up on the screen.
Yes,
Great.
we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks again for having me this evening. I really appreciate it. So my name is Quentin Hanchard. I'm the new Chief Administrative Officer at Credit Valley Conservation Authority. I've been there for about a year. And so my pleasure to be able to come this evening and present on our 2023 budget. Before we get into the slides on our budget, I wanted to touch really briefly on some of the impacts of Bill 23 and the conservation authorities. And I'll do so briefly, but it is quite relevant as it has been for you, we know. So Bill 23 did cause some changes in our legislation that we've had to react to. And one of those has to do with some of our planning and development services. And so I did really just wanted to mention at the onset that these are things that are very much on the table for us. 2023 is a bit of a pivot year for us where we will look to try to figure out how best to adapt to some of those changes that the province has brought forward and how we can continue to serve you in the best way possible moving forward. And we are actively meeting with your staff and with all of our municipal partners to figure out the best ways in which to move forward on that. So tonight I'm just going to give you a few highlights from 2022 as well as some of the 2023 activities that we are proposing. So at CBC, in terms of giving you a bit of a roadmap of our services, we have our broad service areas shown on this slide. And you'll see on the far left-hand side our core business of our natural hazards planning and risk management through our lands, our watershed strategies, our environmental resilience, which is a fairly big envelope that we'll talk about a little bit further, and then our corporate services being our enabling services. So in terms of our natural hazard management side, again, our core business, in 2022, you'll see some of the stats from the number of permits and planning applications that we processed. And all I wanted to really highlight on that was just that we're very proud of how we're able to deliver on our timelines. You'll see that we had 95% compliance with service delivery standard in 2022. And that's something that we are very much continuing to work on and trying to continue to improve upon for 2023. You'll see on our work plan for 2023, we have a few things, one of which is to continue updating our floodplain mapping within urban areas and using our risk and return on investment tool. And that's something that we've talked to Orangeville about in the past, and as well as improving our real-time gauging network, which really allows us on an ongoing basis to be able to tell what the flood conditions are within the water courses. On our lands and conservation areas in 2022, just a few of the key things that we worked on, including some of the work on Menorah Pond and decommissioning that, and we're quite pleased with how it worked out. That's actually shown in the photo on the top right. You can see the drawdown that happened there this last summer, as well as some of the work that's been happening at Island Lake over the past year. We've got more work to do there, and we're quite excited about some of the projects on the go right now at Island Lake, and those should be ready for next year for the 2023 summer season as well. The watershed strategies and studies are an important component, and we have this as a standalone because really the watershed plan is what helps guide us in the work we do over into the future. And so we are presently in the process right now of updating our whole watershed plan. And we're very much looking forward to having that complete, which is likely going to be somewhere around 2024. We've got a lot of work to do, but we're going to be making a lot of progress on it in 2023. And we look forward to being able to come back to you in the months to come to talk to you about how some of that data can be useful and how we can assist you with looking forward to that 2051 planning horizon that we use within our watershed studies. Within the environmental resilience, we have a couple of broad topics and areas, but one of those is about the rural outreach that we do with landowners. And so some of the successes that we get in terms of being able to do restoration and things like that are ones that we do in partnership with the local community, and we're able to create projects with them where they do the work on their land, and we're able to bring funding and expertise to that. And that is something that we are proposing to continue with in 2023, and we do have some further work on that in terms of our source water protection agenda for 2023 as well. The other component of the environmental resilience is the regional biodiversity. And so you'll see again just a few of the projects that we've worked on in 2022, as well as some of the work proposed in 2023, which is really around improving our modeling, as well as some additional habitat restoration that we will look to undertake as well in partnership with the community. Our corporate services section is really our enabling services. They allow us to do all the work that we do. And so lots on the go there, and I won't kind of go into a lot of detail. But what I will say just in terms of 2023 is that much like all public sector agencies, we're working hard to try to make sure that we are an attractive place to work and that we were able to retain our good staff. And so we do have a compensation review underway this year to make sure that we are being able to compensate our staff adequately. And we're also undertaking a renewal of our strategic plan. So that's something we're also very excited about, that in 2023, we'll produce a new, very forward-looking strategic plan. And we look forward to coming back to you, perhaps next year, and being able to present on that as well. So just briefly, in terms of the budget overview for 2023, you'll see on this slide the current value assessment. So these are numbers that we get from MPAC every year, and they tell us the apportionment that is allocated to each of our funding municipalities, which you see on the screen there. You can see Orangeville highlighted in the middle. And the one thing just to note is that there was a slight change. There was actually a slight reduction in the apportionment to Orangeville, and you'll see that it went up slightly for some of the other partners. And again, that's the data that we get from MPAC every year. So in terms of what that translates into, on our general levy, you'll see that for Orangeville, the proposed funding for 2023 is $254,636. It is a 4.4% increase. And I will mention a little later in the presentation a lot of the measures that we put in place to try to minimize the impacts to the greatest possible extent for this year. This is the total levy. So of course, Orangeville, much like a lot of our municipalities, contributes to both the general levy as well as to a special levy, which is a shared levy amongst our watershed partners. So when those are all added up, you can see the totals at the bottom for 2023, the $315,528. And so that represents a change of $13,013 for 2023. So in this one, you can see the sources of our operating budget and where we derive our funds from. You can see that the biggest of the pieces of the pie is the municipal funding that we have. And then you can see the other pieces that comprise our budget as well, from our user fees, which might be from planning, as well as our parks, to a small wedge of the provincial funding, represent the big components. In terms of forecasting where the budget will go, it's very difficult for us to do that at this point, really, because of so many of the changes from inflation to also we have a number of the changes to our act that come into force in 2024. And so we're working on that now. And certainly our intention is that as soon as we're through the 2023 budget, we'll be in the early stages of 2024 looking at what's in store, but also the measures that we can put in place to try to minimize the increases year over year. And for 2023, it is a business as usual budget. Really what we're trying to achieve is to maintain the current program and service levels that we've got, and to ensure that we're maintaining our infrastructure in a good state of repair. We've been extremely successful in getting some fairly significant grants for doing maintenance and repair of our facilities, and I'll get to that in a slide coming up. But we were also successful in our 2023 budget in being able to reduce some of the costs that we've previously had. We were able to renegotiate some of the contracts. We were able to find some savings, and we were able to ultimately find more than $200,000 worth of savings in the budget, which was absolutely something we were trying to do, and in the end reduces the amount of increase that we are coming forward with. And in terms of some of the measures we are putting in place, again, to try to address the inflationary impacts, we do have approval of all of our hiring over 6 months by our leadership team. Our cost of living increase for 2023 is at 2%, so certainly well below the cost of inflation. And as I mentioned, we very actively continue to seek that external funding, which helps us to keep the levy rates down. And I'll show you on the next slide some of that success. We were able to attain more than $4 million for our Bell Fountain site for phase 1. That came from provincial and federal grants. And we've also secured more than $3 million through similar funds for a lot of the capital and infrastructure works on some of our waterfront and southern parks as well. So we're continuing to pursue all of those kind of funding sources, and they've been extremely helpful for us to be able to do some of the capital work that we need to do without having to rely upon the levy for that funding. But of course, we do have those ongoing budget pressures, including our compensation review, which we are starting to plan for at this point, and really just ensuring that we are keeping our assets in a good state of repair, that we're doing our best at being able to provide for the services that our residents and our users are looking for from our parks areas. And as well as some of the future plans that we've got, some of our conservation areas have longer term visions in terms of the capital needs. And we need to have a fairly long view in terms of finding the funding for that as well. So thank you very much, Your Worship. That's my presentation for today, and I would be very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanchard. I appreciate your presentation. I'll turn it over to members of council for question. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and good evening, Mr. Henshaw. Nice to have you aboard, and again, welcome to the CBC, even though we haven't had an opportunity to meet you in person. The question I have is actually from a previous presentation to Orangeville Council on some long-term strategy for our Island Lake property. I'm wondering if you might be able to give us just a 30-second summary of some of the things that might be happening or could be happening with that strategy.
Mr. Hanchard, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, through you, Your Worship. And so we do have our Island Lake strategy. We are very actively trying to work in terms of implementing it. It is a long-term strategy. So we have a new building and quite a comprehensive rebuild for Island Lake that will come through that strategy. In the shorter term, though, there are some more initial things that we're doing. We had the crane gathering space, which was one of our Indigenous partnerships. That one is under construction right now, as a matter of fact. Really looking forward to being able to launch that with our Indigenous partners in the spring of next year. And so we're making some of these incremental changes at this point. You'll see other things going in the next couple of years, EV chargers, for example, for those kind of guests that are there. And so those are some of the initial and short-term things that we've got. We absolutely have the longer-term vision. A lot of the longer-term vision will require much more funding in order to make it happen. And so that's something that we are also looking out at, some of the grant money that we'll get. And I suspect that the ultimate build out will be somewhat incremental based upon us being able to get some of that funding in order to put those pieces in place.
Thank you very much. Was there any additional questions from members of council? Deputy Mayor?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So thank you very much for your presentation. Always interesting to see what the CVC is up to. I think it's always funny when someone puts into their presentation the significant announcement for, park infrastructure. Like, can you be more specific at all? Or are you able to share a little more details on what that is? And then if I may, my second question is more along the lines of CVC here in Orangeville. And I'm curious about the highway and the CVC. When you're in that beautiful facility of Island Lake, you see the highway. And there's ample room there to plant trees and create a barrier so it feels more Muskoka-esque. And I'm just wondering if there's ever been any consideration to do that, to block that off and make it feel a little more intimate, I guess.
Mr. Hanchard, back over to you.
Thank you very much for the question, and through you, Your Worship. Yes, to that, we love that idea, and we're always looking for that opportunity to try to make sure that we are creating those kind of quality experiences within our lands. And so that's absolutely something that we are looking at in terms of being able to provide for additional plantings and more separation. We are, just by the geography, of course, we are close to the highway, but we do want to be able to provide for that kind of experience. We're also looking at and working with some of the other properties adjacent to us. There's the aggregate operation. We're very hopeful we're actually going to be able to expand Island Lake in the years to come. And so those kind of opportunities are part of it, and we're very much working towards that. In terms of the first question, so we very much rely upon being able to get some external funding sources in order for our parks. We did have for Bell Fountain, we did quite a renewal of Bell Fountain over the last couple of years. It was a dam removal that we were able to do there and replacing it with a weir, and a pond went offline. And there was, as components of that, we did really a comprehensive refresh of the park. And some of the other funding we had down on the waterfront, for example, was for doing a lot of the trail infrastructure, new boardwalks, and renewal like that. And so that's generally speaking where the grant money tends to go, is towards infrastructure improvements like that. And that's what we're very actively looking for.
Did I answer your question, Deputy Mayor? Perfect. Was there additional questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much for being here tonight, Mr. Hanchard. We appreciate you coming by and letting us know what's going on at the CVC. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Next up, we have Bill Bangle from 500, 510, and 520 Alder Street regarding the ground sign variance at 500 to 520 Alder Street. And I believe we've got him on Teams as well. Perfect. Mr. Bangle, over to you.
Good evening, Your Worship, council members, and staff. This evening, I'm attending this Zoom call. I'm not sure what the position of staff is on the request itself thus far regarding the second ground sign for the location of a new retail plaza at the corner of Sea Line and Alder Street. This project, it's well underway already, and it entails about 33 units in this complex. It is a very state-of-the-art facility that we're building, where the glass facade is on both ends of the plaza itself, as opposed to just on one end. Furthermore, the signage itself, the reason why the request for the second ground sign is simply because the current owners that are going to be taking place in there, some of them are actual owners of the property, some are actually leased tenants, will not have enough coverage to cover up and create that awareness for the neighborhood, I guess, patrons as far as the operation side. That's one issue. The other one is the reason for the request is more so for public awareness as well, to indicate what's in that plaza itself, as far as different types of businesses service that area. Lastly, the second ground sign, it does not hamper the area in any shape, way, or form as far as safety is concerned, or the daylight triangle obstruction of any nature, or any obstruction as far as the overhead wires itself that are in the area. They're quite far. I believe the minimum distance they are is about 6.5 meters. So that's the relief we are looking for at this point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bangle. Was there any questions from any members of council? We will be dealing with this item at 12.3, but if there's any questions right now, I can turn it over. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship. So, we will talk about this with the staff report, but I guess I'd just like to ask our guest, why not just go with the regulation that you're given? Why try and push outside of the rounds of what most businesses in town have to endure? Like to have the amount of signs that we have around town, there's a sound bylaw in place for a reason. And I guess I'd just like to understand why you think you should be an exception to that rule.
Yes, Your Worship, the simple request, it's not to go against any bylaw of any nature whatsoever. But after evaluating the current sign that we have one in place that we will be installing probably later on this summer, it just does not give us enough space. I think it's just going to create some sort of hardship for the store owners in there of not having any awareness whatsoever, other than the store signage that's going to be within the parking lot side of the plaza itself. Again, it does not hamper any kind of appeal whatsoever. We're not asking for any kind of special treatment in any shape, way, or form. It's just the dynamics of what we're dealing with right now at this point. This is a large site. It's just over 3 acres. And that's why we're here in front of council, just requesting that such a request.
Thank you. Was there any additional questions or comments from council? Not at this time. Okay, Mr. Bangle, we will be dealing with this item at 12.3, so you're welcome to shut off your camera for now, and we can refer back to you if you want to stay on the call. You're absolutely welcome to. Thank you. We will now be heading into the rest of the delegations. So we are starting, before actually we start with the next round of delegations, There is about 16 people, I believe, if I've counted them right, who are delegating on the same topic. So just for a matter of time, everybody is allotted their 5 minutes. But if there is a time where you're going to say exactly what the person before you just said, maybe just kind of skip by it if you can and just keep to the points. And we're happy to hear from all of you. We're glad that you're here. We also just want to remind everybody that there are rules for decorum within these council chambers, and we just expect that everybody will follow the rules of decorum within council chambers tonight. So we will start with Mr. Nicholas Smith, who I understand is joining us by phone. Is that correct? Mr. Smith, you press *6 to unmute yourself and just state your name and address for the record. Mona, do we have Mr. Smith on the line?
Madam Mayor.
Hello?
Yeah. Oh, here we go.
Hello, can anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. Is this Mr. Smith?
Yes, this is Mr. Smith.
Perfect. If you can just give your address and go ahead.
My address is 52nd Avenue, apartment 305. It has a big upside down Canadian flag on it.
Okay, you can begin your delegation. You have up to 5 minutes.
Perfect, thank you. First off, I'd like to start my delegation by pointing out that I was not given a Zoom reference or link. So it just proves the discrimination that's been going on for the past 2 years with the vaccine mandates. I would also like to have everybody else that's there going to be producing stuff there for me since I'm unable to produce it. So I just wanted to have that noted for the record. And since I'm not able to do my presentation, I'd like to add that you're all Nazis.
That's all you've got tonight, Mr. Smith?
That's it.
Thank you very much. Up next, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson is our next delegation. There was already correspondence that was attached to his initial delegation. Madam Clerk, do you mind grabbing that and just keeping it? Thank you. Is Mr. Peterson here? Is Mr. Peterson joining us by phone? If by phone, it's *6 to unmute. Okay. Item 11.5 is Mr. Yeaman. You just want to come up and have a seat, turn on the mic, and then state your name and address for the record, please.
Thank you. My name is Johnny Yeaman, and I reside in Malmer. I've been a long-time resident in the area and also a long-time business owner in the Orangeville and Monroe area. Through your worship, to council and staff. To begin, although it's not required of me, and it's my right to keep confident, I wish to share with council that I'm speaking to you as a fully vaccinated individual. Why would I share that such personal information with you? I would just like it to be known by council that, and anyone else paying attention to this meeting, that the belief of removing all mandates is just as strong with many of us that are vaccinated as well as not vaccinated. I know personally through others in this room that also feel the same way. So my delegation is in reference to the January 9th council meeting, item 12.8, and tonight's meeting, 12.1, vaccination policy review. While I respect Council McIntosh, the fire chief and the chief paramedic services concerns with the safety of fire staff.
Mr. Yeaman, can you just pause for just 1 second?
Yes.
I think we're having a technical issue. I believe maybe they can't hear, so.
No problem. Oh, no problem. Sure, certainly.
My apologies, Mr.
No, no
Newman.
problem at all. It's called the hot seat now, right? I don't mind being the guinea pig, so. I will back up just one notation. So my delegation is in reference to the January 9th council meeting, item 12.8, and tonight's meeting 12.1, vaccination policies review. So while I respect Councillor McIntosh's, the fire chief, and the chief paramedic services concerns with the safety of fire staff and long-term care facilities, I find the recommendations of having a policy in place for only fire staff and the reasoning behind it slightly illogical and ineffective. Orangeville Fire is what's considered a composite fire hall. This means they have both full-time and volunteer staff. It seemed that this was being presented as being a unique situation. In fact, it is not. There are actually 215 composite fire halls listed on the Ontario Fire Chiefs Association website, and many of them are included in the staff report. The majority of the composite halls in the staff report do not currently have a mandatory vaccination policy in place. Ottawa itself has 4 composite fire halls and has revoked the policy, except for what they refer to as employees in high-risk areas. They do not consider fire staff as high risk, and the policy for all their staff, including fire, has been revoked in Ottawa. The proposition of keeping Orangeville firefighters safe by having them all vaccinated, I also find slightly flawed. Orangeville Fire is often on calls with fire, paramedic, and police. This means that they'll be working side by side with OPP officers and others that are actually not required to be vaccinated. Orangeville firefighters also experience many mutual aid calls. This is where basically they call on other fire departments for assistance. 2 main of the mutual aid partners are Shelburne and Grand Valley. Neither of them have vaccination policies. Further to that, if a full platoon of Orangeville Fire is called out on a call, then it's my understanding that they call in Grand Valley Fire to stand in for them in case another call is dispatched in the Orangeville area. Again, Grand Valley does not have a vaccination policy. An example of this occurred as recently as January the 10th. There was a large house fire on the Mono Amaranth town line. While the call went out to Shelburne, it resulted in a mutual aid call with Shelburne, Grand Valley, Rosemont, Dundalk, and Orangeville all working together on the same call. Finally, regarding the fire hall, to have Councillor McIntosh's concerns as firefighter safety addressed, it would require that all other staff, councillors, tradespeople, the public, and family to demonstrate proof of vaccination to enter the fire hall. With regards to long-term care facilities, I do understand how the risk to residents is higher with firefighters attending a call wearing full PPE when the fact a member of the public can basically enter the long-term care home and visit anyone they like without any concern of their vaccination policy, their vaccination status. I do understand this does change during outbreaks. Vaccination policies have been a controversial topic since they were put in place. I'm not here to debate the legality, the effectiveness, or the fairness. It's now 2023, and I believe the policy has run its course. More information has now been made available based on the new information, most regions are revoking their policies. And this is happening very quickly and often. To that point, even since the staff report came out last Thursday, the city of Vaughan has revoked their policy for all staff, including firefighters. And that was just since the past Thursday report came out. So I believe in living in the future, not in the past. As an active person in society and a longtime business owner in the area, I have witnessed what I see as the regression of society. Over the past 2 years, I have seen divisions in both friendships and families. I now start just seeing society begin to heal itself, and I hope that council will introduce and pass a motion to fully revoke the current policy effective tomorrow, not just for themselves, but for everyone involved, including fire services. Council has the opportunity to help society continue to heal, and I hope as individuals, We can all move forward, put the past behind us, live in the future, and reach out to family and friends and reestablish the wonderful relationships we once had. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yeaman. I'd like to call up Steve Coolin now to the delegation stand, please. Again, Mr. Coolin, if you could just have a seat, turn on the mic, state your name and address for the record. And I'll just remind you that you have up to 5 minutes. Thank you, sir.
All right, everybody hear me? So my name's Steve Coolin, 319 Hanson Boulevard in Orangeville. When I found out that the policy was going to be kept in place for nursing homes, I decided to call all of them in town, nursing and retirement homes. All of them stated that volunteer firefighters, paramedics can enter the homes vaccinated or not during emergency, even if there is an outbreak. They will still let the firefighters in. As he said before, even visitors during no outbreaks can make entry into these buildings as well. Currently, there are no COVID-19 outbreaks in any of the nursing homes in the Orangeville area. I just looked it up 5 minutes ago. I can tell you where I work in Brampton, firefighters go in and out of several nursing homes daily, including the unvaccinated ones, and there are several more unvaccinated firefighters in Brampton than there are in Orangeville. And Brampton has not had a mandate in place for months. They got rid of it a long time ago. Health Canada has recently said that over 400 people have died from the COVID-19 vaccines and 10,000 plus serious injuries. You might think these numbers are low, but in the vaccine world, this is an unprecedentedly high number of vaccine deaths and injuries to still be on the market. So Mayor and Council, do you want it on your conscience when someone dies or is seriously injured when you coerce them to get this vaccine or lose their job or livelihood, especially for a vaccine that does not stop the spread, does not stop someone from getting it, and vaccinated people are still going to the hospitals and dying? The firefighters in town that I've talked to, one mentioned that the firefighters that got 2 shots will not get the 3rd. The ones that got 3 shots will not get the 4th. Several have mentioned that morale has gotten way worse when the policy came in place and has not gotten any better. One mentioned how he felt more unsafe with the policy because of 4 volunteer firefighters being fired than he did about catching COVID. And at least a quarter of the full-time members put in letters that they were getting the vaccine under duress of losing their jobs. I'm not sure if the mayor or council have ever heard of Dr. Matt Strauss. He's been in the news recently. He was the medical director for Haldeman Norfolk until he stepped down. During his 18-month tenure there, he did not impose additional mask, vaccine, or capacity mandates. And during this time, the mortality rate was 30% below the provincial average. And compared to other rural health units, COVID mortality declined during his tenure. So it seems to be better that with doing less, things worked out more. I have 2 questions, mainly for the chief. One is, if firefighters can still enter the nursing homes anyways, why is the vaccine policy needed? The other question for the chief, if this policy was so important to him, why was he not here on January 9th to defend it? And why is he not here in person today to defend it?
Thank you very much, Mr. Coolin. Does that end your delegation at this time?
Just at the end, I'd just like to thank everyone for listening. And I believe that I made enough points that the mayor and council should be able to come up with the right decision, which is to right the wrong of the previous council and revoke this policy just like the majority of other jurisdictions have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coolin. Up next is Mr. Freyheit, and I apologize if I am saying the name wrong. Mr. Freyheit. Again, please have a seat at the delegation seat. State your name and phone number for the record.
Sorry. My name is Daniel Freiheit. My address is 800 120 Eglinton Avenue East. That's Toronto. Good evening, members of council. My name is Daniel Freiheit, as I just said. I do a lot of personal advocacy work on Twitter under the name Lion Advocacy. And I discuss a lot about responsible and equitable policies for vaccine rollouts. And I've adopted the slogan, making injustice visible, making injustice visible. In that capacity, I've come across a lot of information from people in the community in Ontario, in Canada, and people in Orangeville on the social and economic costs that these vaccine mandates have now had. I understand that Council today is deliberating on whether to continue on with its COVID vaccine requirements as a condition for employment for new hires, firefighters in particular, but there may be other departments involved. I'm speaking here today to ensure that Council and the public are fully informed as to the social, economic, and political implications of this policy. If at any point you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me. In February of 2022, Dr. Moore, the Chief Medical Officer of Ontario, publicly announced that vaccines weren't working to stop transmission. And Dr. Tam made the same public announcement around a month later. Based on these new developments, their view was that vaccine mandates and passports would have to be re-examined. I correctly anticipated that the provincial government would drop their regulatory vaccine requirements for jobs in public venues, also known as the government vaccine passport system. But what I didn't anticipate was that this message would not get communicated to the broader public, and that many private companies would still hold on to their vaccine requirements, if not for existing employees, then for new employees, new hires. This policy is resulting in a real social and economic divide that's creating a needless political tension, not just in Orangeville, but in Ontario and across Canada. But if a butterfly flaps its wings across the ocean, it affects what happens here today. And so what Orangeville does makes a big difference, not just in Orangeville, but across Canada and the world. I've been in touch with top medical officials who have acknowledged, and I believe this is the view of many doctors privately, that while vaccines ought to be encouraged, mandating them as a condition of employment or participation in economic or social life was never medically endorsed, especially since vaccines don't stop social or workplace transmission. There are many reasons why someone might not want to get vaccinated. One being the very unlikely but possible impact of a vaccine injury. Is it possible to get a show of hands if everyone here is familiar with the Vaccine Injury Support Program? I don't see a show of hands by the council, but it might be. Okay. This is a federal I'll get into it later if I have enough. How much time do I have left?
2.5 minutes.
Vaccine injuries weren't something that anyone wanted to talk about, as I can see, during the critical periods of the pandemic, because if there was too much talk about injuries, people wouldn't get vaccinated, and that would hamper a major public health initiative. In addition, some might say it's hard to know what is a legitimate vaccine injury until full clinical trials on the vaccine are complete and a full review of all the cases and case studies in the literature is complete, something that's not expected to happen for at least another year or two. But vaccine injuries do happen, and it's important that this council and the public is fully informed that, in addition to basically that they're fully informed that that vaccine injuries happen. The Vaccine Injury Support Program is a federal program privately managed by a third party, and that was launched as part of the vaccine rollout. And it was designed to pay people who were injured by the vaccine. Many high-ranking officials in the public and private sector, not just yourselves, never heard of this federal program. It wasn't well marketed, although I understand the media has now picked up a few cases that are generating some public interest. In February of 2022, I made an independent Freedom of Information request to get more information about the program. And in June 2022, I got a response, which was actually quite fast. Most concerning part I saw was that there were significant redactions that I haven't been able to get proper answers to. I'm still waiting for a fulsome response. I couldn't understand why any of it was redacted, in fact, but this is one of the pages of the redactions, which explains, which shows the appeal process and the importance of implementing an open and transparent claims intake process. The program is remarkably opaque, and it's difficult for people who have been injured to make a claim for damages or for any kind of compensation. And the issue is that for people that are applying for jobs, they're not covered by WSIB. So if someone gets injured from the vaccine and they haven't yet been hired, they can't get compensation from WSIB, and they have to rely on this program. Now, for people who get, vaccinated as part of their job requirement, maybe it's possible. I've asked some lawyers, they don't seem to know about this, that what the answer is, maybe it's covered by WSIB. The point is, it's grossly unethical to mandate a vaccine as a condition of employment when, first of all, the injury rate is way higher than expected. And moreover, that the injury compensation program that was designed to help Canadians is failing miserably. And if this doesn't show it to you, I don't know what will. Thank you very much for your time. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Next up, I'll invite Allison Kennedy to please join us at the delegation stand. That's Allison Kennedy. If you can please have a seat and make sure the mic's on, which it is, and just state your name and address for the record, please.
Okay, my name is Allison Kennedy, and I am at 10th Side Road in Mulmer. And I just want to start by thanking the council and Mayor Post for allowing me a platform to speak. My goal tonight is to bring a unique perspective and express that we can indeed move forward as a community. And lastly, since we're being transparent, the next 5 minutes is going to be very therapeutic for me. So thank you for the platform and the opportunity. 13 years ago, my partner joined the fire service. At the time, I didn't know this meant I also married into the fire family. Truthfully, I was very naive in regards to what the career entailed, but I knew a few things for sure. One, you would be hard pressed to find a harder worker than him. I've never met someone as dedicated to their career as he is, and this is clearly his passion. And number two, he conveniently looks very nice in the uniform. Regardless of how naive I was, nothing could prepare me for the mental burden that is placed on a firefighter. To those who do not have a firefighter in their lives, you may not know this, but many of them bear their burden in silence. And they do so that they don't burden the ones that they love. Over the past year, I've witnessed my husband work endlessly on his own journey towards mental healing. And in taking that initiative to focus on this, he has come a very long way. According to CanadianFire.com, firefighters display mental health symptoms at a rate of 34.1%, which is 3 times higher than the general public. According to FireRescue1.com, more firefighters die by suicide than line of duty deaths. And lastly, according to Canadian Firefighter Fatality and Injury Trend Analysis, between the years of 2006 to 2018, fatalities due to mental health in Canadian firefighters have increased by 253%. I would urge the council to contemplate if the mental health pandemic within our fire service has cost the town of Orangeville more money than the time lost due to COVID. During the last meeting, Councillor McIntosh expressed his concerns for firefighter safety twice. He first stated we have to look out for the safety of our firefighters. And second, he stated we are putting our firefighters at risk by removing this policy. And Councillor McIntosh, you are correct. I agree with you. The well-being of our firefighters should be a priority. And since we agree, should we not also consider that by implementing a policy as nuanced and divisive as this one, we potentially worsen the already vulnerable mental health of our servicemen and women? On more than one occasion, I have had firefighters in my home, sitting at my table, enjoying a coffee, expressing their concerns with regards to this mandatory vaccination policy. As of today, some Orangeville firefighters still worry a booster will be mandated through the town, once again threatening their jobs. I'm not here to discuss the transmission rates between vaccinated and vaccine-free people. That data is now clear. I'm not here to discuss the efficacy of these mRNA shots. I am, however, here to discuss the efficacy of this mandate. The question we should really be asking ourselves is, did this policy achieve what we hoped it would? We must begin to care more about uniting our community than we do about preservation of self and the justification of past behaviors. We cannot change the past, but we must accept that this policy has eaten away at the culture within our fire service and resulted in the termination of 4 respected volunteers. We must accept that while the policy is still in place, outbreaks within our long-term care homes continue to occur. I want to be clear, I have no desire to place any blame. The reality is the landscape of the past 3 years has hardly left a single person without fault, myself included. So how do we move forward? If, as you say, the health and safety of our fire members is a priority, the first step should be to revoke this policy so that we can begin to alleviate the added stress on current members. Second, I'd ask you to consider tabling a committee of members who can speak to the well-being of our local fire service and support their mental health. After years of polarizing policies, tension, and fear, I know it will take time and hard conversations, but we must all be willing to set our egos aside and stop punishing one another for the past. All of us here must understand this process, and the truths that are shared tonight are a step towards resolution and healing as a collective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kennedy. Thank you very much, Ms. Kennedy. Graciela Cardenas Mustafa, please, is up next. Again, if you can have a seat, state your name and address for the record, and over to you.
Hello, good evening, council members, Mayor Post. Thank you very much for having me tonight. I think Allison said everything I needed to say. I just want to acknowledge the community behind me, all these people that are here today. As you can see, we're all concerned about the divisiveness of this policy, and we want you to make the right decision. Revoke this policy for the good of our community, to unite our community again, and to just move forward. And Allison said it better than I can ever say it. So thank you very much, and do the right thing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Melanie Schwab is next. You can come up and have a seat at the delegation table. State your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Melanie Schwab. My address is 223 Franklin Street, Shelburne, Ontario. So I just would like to start by saying hello to everyone. My name is Melanie. I'm here tonight to speak briefly about the town's vaccine policy and the impact these mandates have had in our community and on those who live here. I would also like to speak a bit about moving forward without creating more hardships on personal lives and community. I have worked in healthcare for over 11 years now, and up until November 15th of 2022 had been a very passionate and dedicated nurse, putting in 50 and 60-hour work weeks, caring for our seniors at a local long-term care home. I also provided additional nursing services on my day off from floor nursing, doing contract nursing work in long-term care and clinics. I was terminated with just cause from my long-term time positions in long-term care clinic last November 15th due to non-compliance for failing to disclose my personal medical information. Walking you all through some personal experience may give you a better understanding of the mental, emotional, and financial implications that this policy has placed on many individuals and will continue to have on Orangeville staff and fire personnel. I would not wish my experiences over the past year and a half on my worst enemy. The shame, the isolation, and the exclusion from community settings such as restaurants, communal spaces, places of worship, and extracurricular activities was devastating. In a time where community, career, and remaining connected was imperative for mental well-being and strength, many people were left in the dark to fend for themselves. The mental toll these losses created and irreversible damage to many. From personally being shunned and shamed by fellow coworkers to be referred to as the crazy anti-vaxxer and not deserving to keep the title of a nurse or not deserving to have your career are just a few of the ongoing comments. Emotionally, I still have guilt that comes with the terms in which I left the residents I cared for over 11 years that became like family to me. I often wonder what they would have wanted if anyone would have actually taken the time to ask them before the termination started. Financially, over the past year, I've depleted and relied heavily on my savings to pay the mortgage payments, bills, and groceries. This after also being denied any assistance from EI, losing my benefits, and losing the ability to contribute to the pension I had. My spouse took on the stress and burden of covering the entire mortgage, bills, payments, until I was mentally stable enough to go out and start searching for a minimum wage job. As it stands today, I know a couple dozen local healthcare workers who are in the same boat as me, who are either unemployed or have found minimum wage work in another field, hoping to one day have the right to return to their beloved careers and passions, which they work so hard for. Our local hospital currently has 82 vacancies, including many openings for healthcare workers, as well as non-clinical workers. This continues as we have healthy, capable, and educated individuals sitting at home who were terminated and remained unemployed for making a different medical choice. Our community is being directly and negatively impacted by these shortages, as well as burnt out staff who are being run off their feet. Going forward, we need to focus on healing and building our community back into a place where everyone has equal opportunity to work, thrive, and support their families, instead of continuing with an ineffective, divisive policy, creating more limitations and obstacles. As I was reading in the Orangeville Banner, January 19th edition, there were COVID outbreaks both at Lord Dufferin and Avalon and Orangeville here. At Avalon, all staff have to have at least 2 COVID vaccinations, and any visitor entering the building, vaccinated or not, must be rapid tested and wait the 15 minutes for negative results prior to visiting a family member. We all want to keep our seniors safe from any viruses or sickness, but unfortunately this virus continues to infect people of all ages and all settings, regardless of vaccination status. And at this point, I think we can all agree this is happening. Is it reasonable to continue to prevent young, healthy people from working when these vaccines do not prevent transmission? To terminate or deny someone the right to work when there are alternative options such as PPE, testing, staying home when feeling unwell is unjust. To also narrow a hiring pool, denying and turning away young, healthy, qualified individuals' work when additional staff are so desperately needed to fill multiple vacancies is hard to justify. At this point in my journey, after having been fired for over a year now, it is very important for me to speak out and support those who may be facing the same heartache. This discrimination based on a medical choice must never be normalized or accepted. I personally know many Orangeville workers who got these vaccinations against their will, under duress, to keep their jobs, to keep the jobs they love, and to be able to continue to pay for their mortgage and put food on the table for their children. I also know a few who will be facing job loss or have been affected so greatly by mandates they remain off on extended mental health leaves. I will wrap it up. I'm here today to support my fellow community members. I do not wish to see another single member in my community be limited to their hopes and dreams based on a vaccination policy. Losing a career you love for making a different medical choice or being denied a job based on making a different medical choice should never be an option. Was my time up? Okay, I'll just end it there.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Veronica Gallisher, who's going to come up. Veronica? Is Veronica Gallisher here? Or on the phone? You can just state your name and address for the record.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Veronica, and I live at 3 Dean Road in Mulmer.
Okay.
Thank you again for having me tonight. So on October 15, 2021, the COVID vaccine requirements were put in place with a deadline of December 31st, 2021. I'd like to know what the transmission of COVID was by the unvaccinated prior to this policy going into effect. Secondly, the transmission of COVID decreased. Has the transmission of COVID decreased since the policy was implemented, and if so, by how much? If you haven't been tracking this data, how can we know if the policy has been effective? Is it moral or ethical to enforce emergency use approved vaccines on residents without informed consent? Of course, one cannot have informed consent when ingredients are not disclosed. And the Pfizer vaccine ingredients were only released by court order on March 1st, 2022, which is long after the policy was implemented. I would also like to add that according to a CBC article on January 6, 2023, the Vaccine Injury Support Program has paid out $2.8 million since May 2021 for a product heavily pushed onto our people and promoted as safe and effective. On October 10th, at the COVID hearing at the European Parliament, Janine Small, President of International Markets at Pfizer, confirmed that the product was not tested for its impact on transmission prior to its release. All accumulated data shows that these vaccines are ineffective at preventing transmission, so how can we justify such discriminatory policies? And lastly, in the name of transparency, I hope that unlike the last meeting, that all of these delegations won't be edited out online. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Jeremy Glass. If you can just come up to the front, state your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Glass, and I'm from 648 Main Street East, and I'm also a roofing contractor for this area. I'd like to thank Madam Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members for giving me the chance to speak. I'm not really here to make a statement. I want to ask a few questions. I'm not sure if this works, if I could ask the question and maybe get an answer. My first question would be for you, Mayor Lisa Post. During question period, during our last council meeting that we discussed this, you were asked where you base your mandates upon, and you responded that you base them upon health or advice from health professionals. True?
Correct. When the policy was put into place, it was
Okay.
based on public health.
So this is what we're basing our information, our mandates on. Why did people have to be out of work for another 2 weeks for us to hear from the fire chief? Do you consider the fire chief to be a health professional?
No.
You do not consider that. So we don't really need to hear from him today, but being that if he is online with us, I had a couple questions I wanted to ask him. And before I move forward, I just wanted to ask, I'm very computer illiterate. I'm a roofer. I've never thought I would ever publicly speak before, but we're all doing things that take us out of our comfort zone for our cause, including myself. But I did submit a couple documents from Pfizer. They were the documents that Pfizer was forced to release to the Food and Drug Association. So I submitted those documents, which will help if you answer some of the questions. And these documents state that this was never tested to stop transmission from the get-go. And all their studies are post administration studies that they're basing their information on after administering this drug. So which there says that this is an experimental drug. There's been a lot of controversy out there. People are like, oh, this isn't an experimental drug. But when you're relying to get your data after you start administrating it, then yes, it is very much an experimental drug. So what that kind of leads us to is the Nuremberg Code. You know, line 1 of the Nuremberg Code is informed consent. You must have absolute informed consent of a patient to administer an experimental medical procedure, which these gene therapies are. So if we go, and that's to be done without any form of coercion. I mentioned this in the last meeting, like coercion's anything from taking somebody's job away, taking their privileges away, or rewarding somebody with a day off work or 3 days off work. That's coercion. So when this council participates in that type of coercion, you're actually in violation of the Nuremberg Code, which is the most recognized medical document of our time. So it is very important that we uphold this, because I don't know if all of you know why this Nuremberg Code was put into place. It's to protect us from that Holocaust ever happening again. Millions of Jewish people and many of our soldiers died to have that code put into place to protect us from that type of genocide ever happening again. So that's more of a statement than a question. But my questions for the fire chief would be, do you consider yourself a medical professional? And if not, why do we need to hear from you on these matters? Another question would be from him, where are you getting your information from that's any different from Ottawa, from Toronto, from Grand Valley, where they're getting their information from? Like, does he have a different source of information that we don't know of? Like, I don't know if he's able to answer these questions.
I'll answer on his behalf
Okay.
just for a moment. Just to say, if anybody took the time to look at the report that's listed at item 12.1, there's a bunch of research that was done that has led to a recommendation in the agenda. Part of the 2 weeks that we took was to look at what other municipalities were doing. So if you want to continue with your comments, you've got about a minute and a half left.
Okay, well, my main question is, why did people have to be out of work for 2 more weeks for us to come in to hear from the fire chief if he's not a medical professional? If you're getting your information from the medical professionals for these mandates, then why are we hearing from the fire chief?
They were also contacted as part of the research over the last 2 weeks.
Okay, well, you yourself said you don't consider him a medical professional, though, so.
No, I said the medical professionals were also contacted over these last 2 weeks, not just the fire chief.
Okay, so, yeah, so I just, like I say, I thought we had this remanded from your words in the last meeting that we had to hear from this fire chief. And this is serious business. People are out of work. You know, I didn't know how serious this was myself until I went to Ottawa, and then I seen the effects that this has had on people's life. You know, I walked around there the first 2 days all proud, and this is so awesome. Like, look at all these people. And then at the end of my 2 days there, I seen a sign posted in the snow by a lady with their family eating frozen peanut butter sandwiches saying, "Please allow my husband to work." And that made me realize, imagine making that choice between taking an experimental medical procedure that you're not comfortable with and keeping your job. No middle-aged man, no person should be ever forced to make that choice. You know, we have to respect our Nuremberg Code.
Thank you. Next up, we have Miss Carol Ann. Dipna Carol Ann is up next. If you can just come forward and state your name and address for the record, please.
Oh, is it Edward? Dipna?
It's you, yep. And if you could just state your name and address for the record, and then your 5 minutes will begin.
Hello, Dipna Carolyn, 48 Blue Heron Drive, Mono. Thank you, Mayor, Council, and staff for allowing me to speak. I'm going to speak back to the policy, back to September 2021. I formally request the town rescind the vaccine policy, but most importantly, be brave enough to consider it was unlawful in the first place and that it caused harm. Deep down inside, I believe we all know sovereignty over our own bodies or body autonomy is fundamental to human rights. I have never, ever known a municipality to mandate vaccines or any medical procedures. So from the beginning, I questioned the authority the towns had with these policies. Mandates remove choice, which takes away our own sovereignty or autonomy over our bodies. People who freely took the COVID-19 vaccine had little reason to consider the impacts that forced vaccination made to those who did not want to take it. For whatever the reason, not wanting to take the COVID-19 vaccine, if your employer said you must take the vaccine or lose your job, that would definitely feel like an assault to you. And I want to address the policy because I believe resolution requires that we must get to the root of the issue. And the policy is the root of the issue, in my opinion. In the town's vaccination policy, it states after they state who's required to take the vaccine in order to keep their job, that the town of Orangeville has a legal duty under the Occupational Health and Safety Act to take reasonable precautions to protect workplace health and safety. That statement does not mean, to my understanding, that the town had a legal duty to mandate vaccines. I've cut out a bit, so Health and Safety Authority, which to do. That statement actually sort of insinuates that they were given the authority to mandate vaccinations, but that's simply not true. Nor is mandating vaccines part of the dutiful requirement of the town or any corporation to keep workplace safe. When challenged with the lack of authority under the Ontario Health and Safety Act, the town stated they made a decision to implement the mandatory vaccine policy based on public health guidance. I could not find that public health guidance anywhere that directed towns to mandate vaccines. In today's agenda that the town provided information from Ontario, which states on the very last paragraph that the Ontario Health and Safety Act and the ESA do not directly address vaccination or the enforcement of employer vaccination policy for workers. Also from September when the vaccine was put in until now, January 2023, the policy was never updated or revised by the town. The policy caused great harm to our community and medical discrimination by stating unvaccinated pose a significant increased risk to the community. It was not based on facts or scientific data. And as a society, we must not accept false statements as truth, and we must not allow lies to be the basis of our policies, or we'll get what we've gotten for the past 3 years, which is a breakdown of our trust in those policies and in the regulatory bodies that enforce them. I believe knowledge is key, and informed consent looks like this. You are informed of your risk of the virus and also of the known and unknown risks of the experimental vaccine. And then armed with that knowledge, you can freely provide consent to take the product or not to. If you took the vaccine based on flawed municipal policy with incorrect information, then you could not possibly have been informed. And if you took the vaccine because you wanted to keep your job, then you were coerced, and that is force. My employer cannot demand to know what my vaccine status is. That information is protected under the Personal Health Information Protection Act. My employer must let me know if they require my private medical information, and after they let me know why they require it, they must show me how they're going to protect that information. Just lately, I heard a young person take a call for an interview she was quite excited about, and the caller calling her for that interview said, "I need to know if you're vaccinated." She didn't feel comfortable telling that information. And the caller then said, "Would really like to interview you. And could you at least tell us if you've had 2 shots of COVID-19, as is our policy?" And what private medical information will they ask for next? That's my question. What medical intervention will they mandate next? Mandates pose a threat to our democracy and our human rights. We all have a duty to ensure that our rights and freedoms are not trampled on by our very own policies. I'm almost done. As a parent, I'm impacted by the young people that are behind me in this room, including my own loved ones who have suffered enormously under COVID policies. I am watching their light dim, and I know that this dimming stems from the removal of their rights and freedoms, and that happened on my watch. I call on you, Council, to join me as I promise the youth in the room and in Canada that we will do our very best to leave them with the same rights and freedoms that we inherited by being Canadians. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Up next, I'll invite Ms. Bond. Peggy Bond, up next. Yes, it's you.
Freedom.
If you can just have a seat. And state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Okay, so this is Peggy Bond, 18 Goldgate Crescent. Good evening, Mayor, councillors, and residents of Orangeville and staff. Firstly, I would like to thank Council for their unanimous decision last Council meeting to revoke, not suspend, one of the town COVID-19 vaccine policies. Yeah. Thank you. That indicates that you accept that these shots do not prevent transmission, they do not prevent illness, and thus do not improve workplace safety. I hope that this also means that you recognize that these policies are discriminatory and violated the principles of informed consent by coercing some people to receive a medical intervention that they did not want. So thank you again. Tonight, we are all here to ensure that the other policy is also revoked, not suspended. Emphasis mind right now. Absolutely no argument can be made today to justify maintaining this policy in any form that can make biologic scientific sense. I, however, cannot discount that political science might not be used. I was eagerly anticipating what Chief Morden had to say tonight. I am here to comment on 2 items from last council meeting, January 9th. Acting CAO Roy Osmond stated, quote, "We're still not out of the woods. Whether we like it or not, we're still dealing with not just this virus, but other viruses in the community," end quote. I wanted to put forward to Mr. Osmond that we are no longer in a public health emergency. We are dealing with a variety of endemic respiratory viruses, just like we do every year in Ontario between November and March. The current shots for COVID-19 do not prevent transmission nor infection of people from COVID or any other respiratory virus. The accepted infection fatality rate for people under the age of 60 years is less than 0.2% and less than 0.5% for people under the age of 80 years, as per a peer-reviewed study published recently by John Iodinis et al. That is less than or equal to some flu strains. Mr. Osmond, we go into the woods every November, and for 20 years I've been doing it in direct patient care. Unfortunately, we do lose a few souls every year depending on the severity of the season, but overall we come out just fine every April. It's time to stop with the fear messaging. Finally, in response to some comments from some councillors regarding the gallery outburst last meeting, which related entirely to Councillor McIntosh's unexpected and surprise addendum to maintain the policy, I can only say that this crowd of people is rightfully upset. We are an identifiable group that has been openly and unabashedly discriminated against for over 2 years. We and our families have lost jobs. You heard some of the stories tonight. Lost homes, lost status, been excluded from participating fully in society, been shunned by friends and family, been ridiculed, called anti-science, granny killers, selfish, misogynist, and racist, etc. Previous council members have publicly called this group a derogatory term, anti-vaxxers. One councillor wasn't sure he felt comfortable working beside someone from this group. And one person stated that they wanted these people punished. And for what? Because we exercised our right to choose what medical intervention we receive or not receive. Are you interested to know why I refused? Because I was and continue to be afraid of it. My knowledge, and I'm a medical professional over 20 years, again, in direct patient care, my knowledge of the unsuccessful 30-year history of people, scientists, trying to develop a coronavirus vaccine that didn't kill people and actually worked. The new platform that is gene therapy, the molecular manipulation of mRNA, and the use of polyethylene glycol, these are just some concerns to me. Too many unanswered questions and too many uncertainties. I can't imagine what it must feel like to be forced to take something that you are afraid of to keep your job and feed your family. The psychological harm is incalculable, and we're not even talking about physical harms. So you, good mayor and councillors, tonight you have the opportunity to right this wrong. Let's revoke this last vaccine policy unanimously, like you did last council meeting, and let's move on and work together for Orangeville. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gond. Up next is Eddie Carolan. Mr. Carolan, it's your turn. Eddie Carolan. If you can just have a seat at the delegation table, state your name and address for the record, and your 5 minutes will start.
Okay. My name is Eddie Carolan, 207353 Highway 9. Completely not fair that I have to follow Peggy. This is going to be a hard act to follow. Anyway, I just want to start. I was at the last meeting, and I want to address a few things. Councillor McIntosh. He, and I'm pulling this out of context, said we're just a bunch of screaming people. And I know he was referring to that as far as that comparing us to the fire chief. And I thought, wow, what a great opportunity to just maybe let the council know who we are. I'm an immigrant. I came from Australia 35 winters ago. And a lot of people think I'm crazy, but don't hold that against me. Just a little about my background in Australia and my father. My father was, I come from a community of 250,000 people, a suburb in Sydney. My father was the mayor, was the deputy mayor, was a councillor. And why I bring this up and why I think it's very important is my dad understood and taught me one thing, and that he was there to serve. And he served. He was offered federal representation. He was offered provincial representation. He did not take it. He was a humble man. He died a humble man. Unfortunately, I could not be there at his funeral because of COVID restrictions. 1,000 square foot house. He was there to serve. My country, Australia, recognised that and honoured that man with an OAM. He knew what he was doing when he was in council. He was there to serve the community. And that's these people here exercising their democratic right. So, Mr. McIntosh, this is who we are. I'm also, funnily enough, a 30-year pilot. And I'm a flight instructor. And I've done an accident investigation in my tenure. And it is my hobby. It's not my career. I'm a businessman and been in the community for many years, 25 plus. We have a word, we have 3 words in aviation that, because if we get it wrong, it's bad. And we can't be drunk on authoritarianism. We cannot. People's lives depend on it. And we have 3 words, and it is, this looks stupid. And anyone, my students, 14-year-olds, I teach 14-year-olds, they can come up and say, that looks stupid, and I will pay attention, because if we get it wrong, people's lives. And this looks stupid. It really does. There's a great, and I'll reference Greg Hunt. He's a retired Canadian Air Force pilot, and he works for Air Canada right now. He tells the story of Tenerife. Tenerife, there was a captain, Captain Van Zantz, and there was a fog. There was a lot of planes landed. They wanted to get off. Captain Van Zantz was drunk on authoritarian, and he was ready to take off. And he looked down the runway, and it was foggy, and he just went, "We're going." And the first officer said, "No, I don't think the runway's clear." And he dismissed him. And this is why we have modern cockpit resource management, is to take care of this authoritarianism. And he just pushed the throttles forward. It's the worst aviation accident we've had. And we learned from that. This looked stupid. There was a plane on the runway, cost 500 people their lives. So look, what are the consequences if they're wrong? And I talk to staff now. What are the consequences if you're wrong around your policy? And I'll quote Thomas Sowell: "It is hard to imagine a more stupid or dangerous way of making decisions than putting those decisions into the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong." There's people that just over in Beaton, there's one young man, Sean, he wanted to play hockey, he couldn't come in. And he took the vaccine. 2 weeks later, he was not here. So anyway, let's just keep moving on. Did staff present both sides? Did they present both sides when this came out? And I know there's a previous council, but you know what? When I do accident investigation, we want to find out what went wrong so we can better, so that it doesn't happen again. And we don't want this happen again if it was indeed wrong. Pfizer, 209. I also, in my business life, do government contracts. I cannot get a government contract if I'm a criminal, and especially if I'm a known criminal. And I've been charged criminally and fined criminally. Pfizer in 2009 had one of the largest criminal, civil and criminal penalties in the US of $2.3 billion for unlawfully prescribing and promoting drugs. Like, has anyone taken that? And now we're using them to mandate people have to take this. Secondly, when Pfizer released their studies, they had 32 pages of adverse events, 1,200 adverse events. Pfizer's so confident in this product, they don't have any liability. And I could go on. Stop it. There needs to be some adults in the room. This is an old council. Get with it. And anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Next up, we have Mary Rowan. Mary Rowan, if you can come up to the delegation desk, please. And if you can just have a seat, state your name and address for the record, and then your 5 minutes will start.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, Mayor and members of council. It's very hard to follow any of these lovely people that I call friends that I've known for the past 3 years. My name is Mary Rowan. I'm a resident at 84 Lakeview Court in Orangeville. Much of what I wanted to say has been said, so in the interest of time, I will simply reiterate that the times have changed. I desperately hope the information that you've all been presented with tonight, that you've taken in. Each of us have presented different points on the dangers, the threat, the authoritarian tone that we're feeling in this province, in this town. Let's just stick with this town. As the good tax-paying people of this town, you are our public servants. We pay your taxes. We pay our taxes to be served by you in our best interest. This policy with the fire department makes no sense. So help us as people here to ask for your help. Help us understand this policy. If you say there's a rationale, let's continue the conversation and let's ask the chief to clearly explain in his own words, where is he, to explain in his own words the rationale that could help us make sense. This is not just an Orangeville issue. This is a global issue. I recently saw a headline from a few years ago that the last council wanted to proudly be leaders to set the bar. It was in the Hamilton Spectator. Orangeville wanted to be the leader in setting these vaccine policies, and they weren't going to budge. We wanted to lead the way. That's what the last council said. I'm here to tell you that you have failed, and you will continue to fail if you keep these mandates in place. The rest of the world is moving on. I'm not trying to name drop. I'm not personal friends with him, but even Elon Musk has recently stated that he himself suffered adverse events after his second shot. The events, I don't think anyone's named them, but if you weren't aware, as you acknowledged you weren't, of the adverse event reporting system that we have in Canada, in the United States, some of the events include myocarditis, strokes, Bell's palsy, drop seizures, blindness, paralysis, and death. Death is not discriminatory with these vaccines. They do not work. Pfizer lied and people have died. The information is clear. So if our chief and if this council is not willing to look at the up-to-date information, then I'm grateful for this delegation behind me that is here to present this information. It bears looking at. It needs to be looked at and taken very seriously. I'm a 5th or 6th generation resident of this county. My ancestors came from Ireland, Poland, and the Ukraine. They left those countries to come here to live a free life, to enjoy the liberties given to us under God. This council, the fire chief, you are not our lords, you are not our God. And the rules that you are imposing upon us are absolutely unconstitutional. I thank you for your time, and I ask you to deeply consider what each of us have brought to the table tonight.
Thank you very much. Next up is Shannon Stock. Shannon Stock. Shannon Stock, if you're here, come on up. You can just have a seat and state your name and address for the record. And once you start, your 5 minutes will begin.
Thank you. My name is Shannon Stock, and I live at 19003 here Ontario Street. I want to thank the council, the mayor, and staff for this platform that you're presenting us with. It is actually very important that we still have these opportunities to advocate for issues that maybe things might not be right, we might not feel right about, to have the ability to come forward and present our cases and data and information. So I thank you very much, because during this time, I'm finding that there's a lot of censorship. People are getting shut down for having opinions that differ from others, that differ from the narrative, and we're getting into a really scary time. If these platforms are shut down, that means that we really do not live in democracy anymore. And although we still have the guise of democracy, it is really going to be up to many people like you, and of course, many of the people who are in the room with me today, to determine how our path forward is constructed. There are many people in the world who have certain ideas and ideologies. Some of you may agree with those. We certainly do not, and we're here today to try to change something and try to make something right. So many of the people before me have talked about a lot of the facts that I wanted to share. You know, misinformed consent has been covered 100%. The fact that the vaccinations are not effective. They do not stop transmission. You know, this was all sold to everybody on a foundation of safety and efficacy. And we have far gone from that. So can somebody explain to me, and this is really hypothetical, but how do we get from a space where people are saying, no, you can't have these other thoughts about what's happening in the world, but at the same time, the narrative for COVID-19, for the virus, for the mandates, for everything related to it, has shifted and evolved along the way. So these additional other dissenting viewpoints and opinions are not welcome to the table to help shape what is really happening and how this is actually evolving. It's being a controlled narrative. And that's what really has to change. So I'm not going to get into and repeat some of the points that have already previously been stated. Instead, I'd like to refer to some of the links that I have provided in my submission today. One of them being a paper on the mechanism of side effects for the mRNA vaccinations. This was written by a group of doctors One name that you would, I'm sure, all recognize is Dr. Peter McCullough, clinical cardiologist, very well known in his field. He is actually, I believe, one of the most published doctors in his field and respected. Up until COVID, that is, where all of a sudden his opinions were of dissenting views, but that's beside the point. Some of the highlights of this paper that he formed with some of his colleagues is that the spike protein is neurotoxic and it impairs DNA repair mechanisms. Does that make you feel good about it? The mRNA vaccines potentially cause increased risk to infectious diseases and cancer. Now, I'm not sure about your exposure, but I've certainly been hearing a lot from many doctors who are experts in their fields, and we have been hearing about increased cases of cancers. We've been hearing about increased cases of certainly heart-related issues, increased cancers of neurological disorders, blood clot issues, blood disorders, you name it, it's there. Jeremy Glass was good enough earlier to refer to the COVID vaccine the vaccine documents that were actually filed with FDA for the emergency use approval use, right? Within those tens of thousands of papers, a good at least 2 or 3 of those, and right up front, are dedicated to just the side effects alone that Pfizer had uncovered during just their initial trial periods. So if that doesn't chill you to the bone, if you haven't seen it, I definitely encourage you to go out and find that information. Now, keep in mind as well that they had to go to court to get those papers released. The Pfizer and the FDA were actually arguing that they needed 75 years to release those documents to the public. There was a judge who was good enough to determine that the information within those documents were important enough that everyone should receive those and within a year's time. So thank goodness for that judge. And I'm hoping that many of you will be of similar mind and thought and critical thinkers to be able to make these decisions for yourself and actually look at the cold, hard facts of what is going on around us. Now, I know that's my time. There was one, there was a few other links, but there was one that I put in there of a summary of preliminary findings. This is a panel that was run by Senator Ron Johnson in the United States. And the link that I provided is a 3-hour video. Okay, so I get it, it's a time investment. However, in just the first 30 minutes of that document, you're going to hear from individuals speaking about, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. Sorry. So sorry.
Stock, I'll give you like 30 seconds to wrap it up if you can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're going to hear from individuals such as Aaron Suri, who is a lead counsel in litigation related to vaccine injury and other related types of litigation. He's talking primarily about vSafe, which is a CDC premier system that they opened up for people, for participants to be able to go on and log their experiences with the COVID vaccination. What he has to say is actually very interesting. And the CDC, in fact, has not willingly released the information. They also had to go to court to fight for it, and the results are startling. Another one, Edward Dowd, you may have heard some of his comments, former senior investment advisor with BlackRock. He has many things to say and certainly takes a look at the excess mortality rates that have been happening globally. And again, the information and the results are startling. This is a narrative that is being controlled. People who are speaking up against it are being silenced. And I encourage you all today to do the right thing. If not for the rights of your people and that you believe that you're doing the right thing, I would encourage you all to do it for your own protection. Because at the end of the day, there's enough information coming out. More people are waking up. You're all teetering on the brink between ignorance and negligence. And let me tell you, it's an entirely different ballpark when you're on court for negligence.
Thank you, Ms. Stock.
Thank you.
Lastly, we have John Bell. Mr. Bell, if you want to come up. You can just have a seat, state your name and address for the record, and your 5 minutes will begin.
Good evening, Council. My name is John Bell. I reside here in Orangeville on Colborne Crescent. I think I want to start just by saying how proud I am of the people behind me here. What a turnout, how proud I am for all of you supporting your community tonight. To those in particular, a couple of women who spoke out, told their stories. I think you gave a voice to my wife, who's also here, and was also fired from a long-term care facility in the area. Council, your fellow community members are in pain. This division has dragged out for too long. Tonight you have an opportunity to begin a healing process and be a force of cohesion for your town. Mrs. Post, what an opportunity for you to kick off your mayorship with love and acceptance. I'll move quickly through my points. My request is that you consider them with an open mind. So I want to start with a couple historical facts. Take them as you will. Historically, we've had societies that have participated in mob mentalities, groupthink, witch hunts, and many of the times, these instances have been turned out to be completely wrong. We also have pharma, big pharma regulators like the FDA, who've allowed numerous drugs for public consumption. I think of thalidomide in the 60s and 70s that had devastating effects on children. It might be time that we accept that big pharma doesn't necessarily have our best interests at the top of their priority list. There are currently calls from doctors around the world, especially UK and US, to halt this product until a sufficient investigation has been done on the rapid rise of sudden deaths, strokes, and heart issues. I'd like to acknowledge the Great Barrington, the Great Barrington Declaration. This is a group of over 60,000 doctors, scientists, and nurses who are calling for an end to mandates, including employment policies. I did notice in the circulating emails there a group of municipalities that are currently either active or inactive on their employment policies. So last night I did look up just at job postings to just add a few to your list here. First off, for the town of Mono, the last time I checked, on the last employment opportunity I saw from them, they didn't have it listed on their page, so I guess that one's questionable. But here's who you can add to your list of municipalities who are not enforcing an employment mandate. Windsor, Cambridge, Niagara Falls, Kitchener, Kingston, Mississauga, Brampton, and the City of Toronto. We now know that the shots provided for this virus do not stop contraction or transmission of the virus. Please ask yourself how the mandate is logical or relevant from what we now know. Some much larger centers came to an appropriate conclusion. We've noticed now, I've noticed anyways, some municipalities have switched their line of expressing their justification for using these mandates. Some of them have now seemed to switch to claiming that they're protecting the health of their employees. Now, to me, this means they are somehow claiming that they are responsible for the personal health and decisions of their employees. I'd ask, are there mandates for sugar intake, daily exercise, limits on risky behavior like skydiving? This claim is nothing other than an attempt at expressing moral superiority. Regarding just a few points regarding the mandate for firefighters. Quite frankly, I'm shocked that our fire chief is not in attendance today after we postponed our meeting for him to be here tonight. I'm concerned, the fire chief. I'm concerned that we are not able to come up with a vote, a decision. I understand you wanted to consult a little bit more or kind of get his input on the matter. But council, we elected you to make these decisions. We didn't elect the fire chief to make the decision on vaccination policy. Okay, I have some present data. I'm gonna just go through quickly. I'm not gonna get in depth in it, but one point I wanna make from it is that this is a risk analysis. And part of the stats I came across was that the most affected people by the spike protein seem to be young men in the 20 to 44-year-old age range. This is unfortunately the same demographic that the fire chief wants to keep mandating shots for. Another concern I have on the fire in particular, hiring the most qualified candidates should probably be a priority over hiring the most vaccinated candidates, Council.
Mr. Bell, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to wrap it up because you're past your time.
Gallery behind me, please raise your hand if you're in support of keeping this policy tonight. That speaks a lot, Council. Where are the people that support this? Will they not be in attendance tonight? Would the community not be here if they wanted to keep this in place? I'll go through just quickly, briefly on the statistics I submitted. They were through statistics mostly from the National Statistics Bureau from UK and England. Basically, they compared years prior to the pandemic to the last few years. And here are a few of the stats they came up with. The UK in the second half of 2022 had 26,300 excess deaths compared to the previous years. The most common setting for these unexpected deaths were in people's private homes. Obviously, a number of factors are at play, and I'm not suggesting causation. You can't, of course you can't. There are so many variables. This is the same way that you cannot possibly suggest causation and say X amount of people's lives were saved because of a vaccine. It's strictly impossible.
Thank you.
I guess to wrap it up, I ask you to please do the right thing tonight. End this harmful policy. Be part of the solution to help people heal. Promote cohesiveness. Promote equality in our community and equal opportunities of employment for qualified candidates. Support your community members. Don't suspend this mandate. Revoke this mandate and end this discrimination tonight and forever.
Thank you, Mr. Bell.
Freedom!
Okay, we are now into the staff reports section. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight and delegating. We're into 12.1, which is vaccination policy review. The recommendation is that report CPS 2023-10 vaccination policy review for participating individuals be received, and that council suspend the COVID-19 vaccine policy for participating individuals effective January 24th, 2023. Councillor McIntosh, I know you had a comment. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to thank everybody that had their comments today. I've never heard my name mentioned so much, so I appreciate that. I'd like to put forward a motion, and I'd like to use option 2, and that is revoking the vaccination policy. This policy would no longer be in effect should the town be requested to adopt any new government and/or public health directive. A new policy would have to be prepared and adopted. Now, I worked on this in collaboration, so I'm making this motion in collaboration with our fire chief. We've talked over the last 2 weeks, and even though fire has a higher exposure risk to most occupations, we still think this is the way to go to revoke it and to keep the policies consistent with other areas of the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McIntosh. So to be clear, your motion is to revoke the COVID-19 vaccination policy for all staff effective January 24th, 2023.
Correct.
Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Sherwood. Can I open the floor for any discussion or questions from members of council? Any questions? Perfect. We will call the vote. All in favor of revoking the policy? That's carried unanimously. At this time, we're going to call a 10-minute recess, which will allow everybody to move about. So we'll see everybody back at 8:55. At item 12.2 in the agenda, which is council task, there is a recommendation in the agenda that report CPS 2023-005 council tasks be received. Can I have a motion, please? Deputy Mayor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Prendergast. Was there any questions? Seeing none, I'll call the vote, please. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Next up is item 12.3, which is the sign variance application 2679504 Ontario Inc., which is for 500 to 520 Alder Street. The recommendation is that report CPS 2023-007, the sign variance application for that address, be received, and that council deny the variance to the sign bylaw to erect 2 ground signs measuring 7.61 meters in height by 3.02 meters in width. Can I have a motion for the recommendation in the agenda? Deputy Mayor Taylor, seconded by Councillor McIntosh. Was there questions for Councillor Andrews?
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and good evening. This is for the delegate as well as staff, and I'd like to again thank the delegate for being a part of the discussion this evening. Is the delegate with us? Okay.
Mr. Bengal, I believe you're still on Teams.
I still am, yes.
Perfect, thank you.
Great. Thank you. One of my roles on council is chair of the Business, Economic and Cultural Department, so I always applaud any investment that is taking place in our town, and I want to thank you and those that are associated with this particular project. A new retail commercial space that is quite significant in that part of our community. Having said that, I'd like to just know a little bit about the background on where some of the sign design came from the perspective, did you do any comparatives within our community in addition, of course, to the current sign bylaw that we have?
Mr. Bengal?
I'm sorry, can you clarify what you're asking exactly as far as comparative?
Did you take a look at some of the existing signs that we have already at some of our other similar sized establishments, say, for example, similar sized commercial space, or even as an example, the Orangeville Mall?
The only one we looked at was the mall that's directly behind us where the LCBO store is. That's a quite significant mall there, and I know they have more than one ground sign there due to the nature and proximity of where that development is or the complex is. Unfortunately, because of this denial, it's just going to create some hardship. For me, the concern is more for the actual unit owners or the actual tenants to run their business as a viable source for the neighborhood.
Yeah, I appreciate that reflection and comment and then the comparative that you had of the adjacent commercial retail space that is off of Riddell and of course Centennial. There are other locations we have in town as well. I think the other question is the illumination. Now, if I'm correct in saying so, from what I saw in the information that was provided, it is going to be an LED proposed illuminated sign. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we are prepared if it's going to impede on any form of vision restriction as far as noise, or I shouldn't say noise, more of the light transmission that's to the neighborhood that is along Alder Street. We are willing to accommodate for such a request.
I have one question, Madam Mayor, to staff. Do we have any examples historically where we have allowed a variance to take place on a sign?
Ms. Landry or Ms. Khan? Ms. Khan?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm actually going to ask Officer Christopher Johnson to weigh in, as he is the licensing officer for sign permits and will be able to provide some of that background.
Thank you. Mr. Johnston, over to you.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. In past, we have the specific plaza that Mr. Bangle is referencing was before my time at the town, but that plaza did obtain a variance approval for the 2 signs at both the LCBO Plaza and the Dairy Queen Plaza. Most recently, memory serves correct, we had a variance request for Orangeville Mall. They wanted a 3rd ground sign, and they already had 2 existing on the property, and staff recommended that we deny that third request. So in past, it has happened.
If I may, just for the sake of a comparative, and again, I think it's always important that we take a look at the applicant, we take a look at the situation that's in front of us. But I know, Ms. Johnson, you've identified a couple of examples that are also identified as being the sign variance, as I'm trying to say here. In the case of the Orangeville Mall, I'm not going to go into the historic piece there, but we know that those particular signs are quite profound, large, and they do identify, again, the various tenants that are in that location. Because this particular application is identifying there will be 33 new tenants in that location, especially in a new part of our retail commercial space development, I'm looking for any guidance on how each one of us is going to vote a specific way according to this and based on the staff report. But I always, again, encourage any opportunity to highlight new businesses, and I'm hoping it doesn't impede anyone's potential success at that location.
Can I perhaps turn it over to Ms. Khan just to give some context as to additional signage? So if this variance is declined, as recommended in the agenda, can you give some suggestions and ideas of alternate signage that would be permitted on the property?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So just for broader context with respect to this application, the reason why staff is recommending a denial of the application is because it far exceeds the parameters of what the sign bylaw allows for. So as stated in the report, there is one ground sign allowed on a property of this size. However, the one ground sign would be much smaller than what is being requested by actually quite a bit. And then there would be a second ground sign that would be permitted, but that's only if it has a readograph on it and there's certain parameters applied to the second ground sign. So the applicant would have other options with respect to having ground signage. It just wouldn't be of the sheer magnitude and size that is being proposed. In addition to that, businesses, as everyone is aware, they do have their facade that they can put facade signage on. There's temporary signage that can also be leveraged. So it's not that it's this way or no option. There would be other opportunities for them to get their name out there.
Thank you. And those limitations to the size of the sign, that's based on the size of the lot, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you, Ms. Khan. Councillor Sherwood?
Yes, through you, Your Worship, to Mr. Johnson. The reference to the signage over at Centennial Road plazas, can you, I hate to put you on the spot, but can you tell us what size they were that they got approved for this variance? What size they are compared to this request?
Mr. Johnston?
Yeah, through Your Worship, to Councillor Sherwood. I don't have the specifics in front of me. That was before my time at the town. Just when I started, I was aware of those two properties obtaining a sign variance. However, I can find out and let you know at a later date. I just wouldn't have that in front of me tonight. I do apologize.
No apologies. So visually, do you think that they quite exceed quite a bit, or probably just very minor in difference to what the actual sign bylaw permits?
Judging by some of my experience with the sign permits, I would say they do exceed quite a bit. They're replicate copies of each other, so they're almost carbon copy of each sign on the property. So I'd imagine this first sign that was installed met the criteria of the bylaw, however, the second sign would not. So.
Just one further thing, Your Worship. Perhaps the applicant could come back with something a little bit more realistic in size.
Thank you, Councillor Sherwood. Was there additional questions or comments? Councillor Prendergast?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is more for the town, and I'm wondering if there have been any complaints to bylaw regarding signage used by Westside High School. with their illuminated sign, if that's impacted anyone in that area, because I see the signage on Alder maybe being larger and more intrusive to those residents in that area. So I'm wondering if there have been previous complaints.
Ms. Khan?
Not to my knowledge. That's not to say that there haven't been. And again, I'll defer to Mr. Johnson to see if he has any background on that.
Mr. Johnston?
Through your worship to Councillor Pendergast, no, I'm not aware of any sort of sign illumination complaint. If there were, we would obviously work with partners in the Ministry of Environment, Building Department to get those resolved. So not this time.
And those ones were not variant signs. Those ones were installed within the parameters of the sign bylaw. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Thank you. Was there any additional questions from members of council? Deputy Mayor?
It's not a question, just a comment. So someone who's been involved with the town, probably just as long as you have, Mayor Post, and watching and the different situations that have come up over time. The sign bylaw was a very controversial thing when it was put in. A lot of work was done on it, a lot of thinking, and you know, there's always ways to improve it. But the reality is, my position is we should be respecting it. And I think that your comments, Councillor Andrews, about the businesses, I think they're spot on. We want the businesses to come, and the gentleman who is trying to open this facility and have the different businesses there, I'm certainly interested in supporting them, but I won't be supporting this bill as it is. And I think that the suggestion made by yourself, about coming back with another plan in place is probably the best thing at this point. So I'll be voting to support the staff resolution on this. Thank you.
Was there any additional questions? Councillor Stevens.
Through you, Your Worship. So mine's just wondering to staff, was it denied, or your proposal, was it denied based on the two signs or the size or both?
Ms. Khan?
Through you, Madam Mayor, both. So in terms of sheer size, the first sign is exceeding, so the one sign would be permitted to have a maximum of 9 square meters. This is exceeding it by almost 14 square meters. So it's more than double the size of what would be permitted in the bylaw. And then similarly, the second sign would be exceeding the amount by almost 18.5 square meters, which the permitted size for the second sign is only 4.5 square meters. So it is the number of signs and the sheer size of the signs.
Councillor Stevens?
Thank you. Again, through your worship. For this gentleman on the phone, is there a way that we could maybe give him two signs? They're both busy streets. If he brings a proposal back that they're a little bit smaller.
Ms. Khan?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you. So there are provisions within the sign bylaw that would allow the applicant to have two signs, and it would essentially permit the applicant to have one ground sign that would be 9 square meters and a second ground sign that would be 4.5 square meters. So they would be permitted to have two ground signs, and that's not, that wouldn't be inclusive of anything they might want to put on their facade or any additional sort of signs of maybe of a temporary nature. And that would be covered in the bylaw and wouldn't require additional variance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Was there any additional questions or comments? My only additional comment would be that I will be supporting the recommendation in the agenda as printed, mainly because I think when it comes to a sign variance, it's meant to be for smaller variances in nature rather than significant variances. I do think we have a provision to have variances for a reason, but I'd really like to see Mr. Bengal come back with a proposal that will be closer at least to meeting what our sign bylaw requirements are currently. So with that, if there's no further questions or comments from council, I will call the vote. All in favor of the motion on the floor? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Mr. Bengal, thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 12.4 is the regulatory bylaw review work plan. There's a recommendation that report CPS 2023-009 regulatory bylaw review work plan update be received, and that staff continue with the completion of the following bylaws in 2023. Parks and special events, tow truck licensing, review and report back, animals, the hen pilot program, lawn watering, traffic, including encumbering highway, road occupancy, sale of goods, Montgomery Village, fouling of a highway, topsoil removal, discharge of water into sanitary and storm sewer, and that subject to budget approval, staff review the following additional regulatory bylaws in 2023: noise, restaurant licensing, records retention, smoke-free municipal public places. Can I have a motion on the floor, please? Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Prendergast. Was there questions or comments on this item? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to say it's fun now as we've gone through this on a cycle. I remember all these. I remember all these discussions, and I think this list is very appropriate. So I'll be voting in favor of moving forward with this list. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you, Your Worship. More of a comment than anything. I absolutely love this list. Will we be going in any special order? Because I look at discharge of water into sanitary and storm sewers. Seems a lot more important than the HENS project or some of the others that are mentioned on here. So I hope we prioritize them as importance.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I can certainly take the first part, and if our General Manager of Infrastructure wants to add anything, by all means, through you, Madam Mayor. So yes, there are a number of bylaws that are listed for 2023. And as you can see in the report, they are divided by departments. So it could well be the case that there will be 2, maybe 3 bylaws being worked on simultaneously, just depending on which department is tackling them. So some of the ones that you see at the bottom of the chart for 23, like traffic, lawn watering, topsoil removal, those will be handled by infrastructure services, while us in corporate services may be doing hens or animals. And so it may be simultaneous, and then we'll hopefully get them into the cycle as they're prepared.
Thank you.
Was there any additional questions or comments? I do have one, which is we talked a little bit about the fireworks bylaw and having that looked at a similar time to the parks and special events, because there are fireworks provisions within that one as well. And I think having clarity and having those two come together at the same time would be a good thing to look at. I don't know, I don't have the full report in front of me right this second, but I know fireworks is scheduled to be looked at in a couple more years, right? 25. So I would look to perhaps move that one up the list and do it simultaneously with parks and special events, just to make sure that that language is similar. And I don't know which one would leave on that one. So I know we would have to sacrifice one to accommodate that one, but I would turn it over to Ms. Khan for comment on that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the Parks and Events bylaw, as you know, is nearing the finish line. So it wouldn't necessarily be at the same time, but perhaps it could be slated in for at some point to come back in the balance of 23. And yes, in terms of taking one off, I would look to for council's direction in terms of, is there anything on this list that you think can be shifted to 25, maybe a straight swap? You probably would have seen in the report, however, that the animals component has been initiated. Research has started on that. And with respect to tow truck licensing, there is a report back due just given with respect to the provincial framework that's coming into effect. So it would make sense to keep that on there. The noise bylaw, I know that there has been a desire to look at that in 23, so we have that slated for 23 as well. So I'm not sure if there are any on here that you feel as though could wait potentially to the end of 24 into 25.
Thank you, Ms. Khan. I'm not married to the idea, just suggesting it if there is a suggestion from council as to which one could be removed in its place. The other one that I wanted to make comment on is through the election, we did hear a lot about the open air burning. And I'm not saying that we need to pull back that entire bylaw right now to look at it, but I would appreciate if we could put it back to Chief Morden and staff to have a look at the component that has to do with sensitive receptors. That's become a huge significant issue within our community. So if just that one component of the bylaw could be relooked at through 2023, specifically ahead of the spring burning time, would be great if we could revisit that component. That would be the only additions that I have, and I'd leave it to council to discuss. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Worship. I think that makes a lot of sense too. And I just wanted to ask a qualifying question of staff. And that is, so I agree. We had a discussion recently and I thought that that was carried forward as something that the fire department was going to come back and do. And that was the open air burning. Just how's that going? What's the postmortem? And the second piece was council 6 or 7 years ago voted to have additional staff and 24-hour service. And the fire department was also going to come back on that and give a little report and just a post-mortem. How's it worked? Was it a good spend? Was it not? And it was those two issues that were brought up. And I don't know if we officially did it, but there was a lot of head nodding. And now that you're bringing it up, Your Worship, I just think we need to know both those things because both were A, a lot of time and B, a lot of money, for the town.
Is there anybody from staff who'd like to comment on that one? Mr. Osmond?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to all the council, to Deputy Mayor. A good point. I can take that back and discuss it, and certainly be a wonderful idea to bring forward a little report card, and now we're doing with with those items. And I'll take that under advisement and do that. Timelines. I won't promise it in the next month or two, but certainly sometime before, maybe late spring. Give us a chance to do a review and see what we can come up with, but that shouldn't be a problem. It's a good idea.
Thank you, Mr. Osmond. Ms. Khan, I'll turn it back over to you in a moment, Deputy Mayor. Do we need an additional addendum or adjustment on the motion that's on the floor in order to incorporate the open air burning component?
If that's the wish of council, sure, that would be great.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, back over to you.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just as a clarifying question, I don't know that that would necessarily be like, it's not a regulatory bylaw that we're changing necessarily. It's just a review of what happened, right? So we're not asking for bylaws to be rewritten. It's just, was what happened a good thing on both those two items? And if I could, the last thing would be is, I am interested to find out about the volunteers, Mr. Osmond, but I would prefer that, I think, Mayor, I was going to call you Councillor. I think Mayor Post is correct. Like we should hear back on the open air burning first, and because the season is coming, right? So if staff had to prioritize their time, I would like to hear both, but I think there's urgency on what Mayor Post is saying.
And I think just to build on that, the reason I'm bringing it up at this point is that I don't think that the entire bylaw needs to be reviewed at this time because that is coming up in the next couple of years. But I'd like to review that sensitive receptor component specifically to see if we can amend the bylaw and what the parameters are around the sensitive receptor. So I'd like to see that added into the motion. Ms. Khan?
Madam Mayor, if I could paraphrase what I'm hearing.
Perfect.
Okay. Perhaps the amendment can be something to the effect of that staff report back on the sensitive receptor program and provide any recommendations with respect to a possible amendment to the bylaw.
Perfect. Would the mover and seconder be in favor of that? Yeah, we can add that as a friendly amendment. Perfect. Was there any additional comments? Perfect. Okay, I will call the vote then on the motion on the floor. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Item 12.5 is an analysis of Bill 109, More Homes for Everyone Act 2022, and Bill 23, More Homes Built Faster Act 2022, INS-2022-030. There's a recommendation that report INS 2022-30 analysis of these two bills be received and that staff proceed in the manner as outlined in the report, INS 2022-30. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Andrews and Deputy Mayor, was there comments or questions? Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And this would be, I guess, to Mr. Ward. And I guess this would be to Mr. Ward. Thank you, first of all, for the report. It was really something to read and the complexities that we have. I know that I've spoken about the DC challenges that we may have. How impactful, in your opinion, based on what I read, and I look over at my fellow councillor Sherwood, who's been a part of the Heritage Committee for a number of years now, how impactful, in your opinion, would some of these potential changes be on the heritage component of our community? Because it's an important part of what makes Orangeville very special.
Mr. Ward, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Andrews. It's a great question. There's presumably going to be much more work ahead of us. What the province has essentially done with respect to heritage is really, it's focusing more on the listing of properties, which we've long relied upon to identify properties that are of cultural heritage value or interest. It sort of provides an interim protection, namely against demolition. It doesn't provide full heritage protection in terms of requiring permit approvals for site alteration, but at least it's sort of a use it or lose it type of approach to identification and preservation. What the province is doing is saying you can't leave these properties on these listings in perpetuity. You have to do something with them in 2 years. So what that means is it's going to be presumably a little more work for Heritage Orangeville and for staff to really preemptively go in and look at these properties more proactively and deciding, do they need to be designated or do they need to be taken off the list?
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Did you have an additional question? No? Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, through you, just to add to what Mr. Ward has said, and thank you, Councillor Andrews, for bringing that up. That was quite a concern that I keyed in on there. And one of the things being the council-appointed member for Heritage, I'm looking forward to that committee getting up and running. And this will be a very significant priority for our committee. And don't be surprised if we come back and ask council to designate a significant number of properties that are currently sitting in the non-designated. I think we need to take this seriously. And that's what I'm looking forward to once this committee is up and running.
Thank you for that, Councillor Sherwood. That's important information. Was there additional questions or comments from council on this item? We've got to move on. Oh, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So that I look forward to the discussion. That is not going to be fun. You know, you're going to pit neighborhoods against each other when, I don't mean you, Councillor Sherwood, excuse me, no disrespect. That discussion is going to pit neighborhoods against each other. And I think you'll find it's going to be divisive. And I wish we wouldn't go down that road.
Councillor Sherwood.
So I wasn't very specific in saying heritage district. We can look at individual properties and designate an individual property.
So for those who wish to be registered, we can do that and
Right.
expedite it more quickly than we have in the
Not
past.
necessarily a district. And I think that's what you're alluding to, is the fact the whole district being a street or whatever. But I think once the committee gets up and running, then we can make those discussions and decisions. But I'm looking at the overall registry and which ones we know we can significantly individually designate. But that's to come.
Thank you. Additional questions? I will call the vote then. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Next item is 12.6, Survey Lane Site Access Agreement, INS 2023-004. There's a recommendation that INS 2023-004 Survey Lane Site Access Agreement be received and that council pass a bylaw authorizing the mayor and clerk to sign an access and indemnity agreement for the continued access, use, and maintenance of Survey Lane for 59 3rd Street. Can I have a motion, please? Deputy Mayor, and seconded by Councillor Prendergast. Is there questions on this item? Seeing none, all in favor? And that's carried unanimously. We're going to move on to correspondence. There is a recommendation, first of all, that the month of March 2023 be proclaimed as Irish Heritage Month and that the following correspondence be received. 13.1 through 13.17. I will read them off really quickly if you bear with me. The proclamation request for Irish Heritage Month, the Credit Valley Conservation 2023 budget information, a report from Charles Harnick, our Integrity Commissioner, with the annual letter and report. There's a letter that I received from Ms. Noble's grade 3-4 class with ideas for town improvements, and then my reply to that letter. And then we have correspondence from Brian Ferguson, Nicholas Smith, David Boyce, Jeremy Glass, Dimpna Carolan, Brenda and Lino Chioma, Edith Baker, Karen Yeaman, Jenny Benville, Unique de Krieger, John Bell, and Anita Kim. Can I have a motion to receive? Councillor McIntosh and Councillor Sherwood. Is there questions on any items of correspondence? Deputy Mayor?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So I would just like to speak to item, 13.3, and it's the report by our Integrity Commissioner. And I don't know what we do about this, but so I would suggest that we spend $10,000, and I know that we need to do that. There's a mechanism in place. Mr. Harnick is new, so we'll see what Mr. Harnick does in the role. The previous person wrote toothless, wasteful documents that were a complete waste of taxpayers' money. And I would just like to suggest that at some point, the integrity commissioners need to have some tooth and do something. Otherwise, I don't want to spend the money on this. And again, I know by provincial legislation, we have to have these things, but it's just so frustrating to see a bill for almost $10,000 and a complete waste of time. And that's my opinion, but I'm emotional about it because I read those reports with great interest and they were not worth the paper they were written on.
I think it's a very frustrating process that oftentimes there's very little an integrity commissioner can do when it comes to penalizing an elected official on some of their behaviors inside council chambers, even if they are found guilty of those things and breaches of code of conduct. I would suggest that if you're interested in doing so, that perhaps at a notice of motion at some point, you could potentially request that on behalf of council, we send a letter to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, because I believe it would be his department that would take care of that, just expressing our displeasure with the process and asking for enhancements to the process as we move forward. So I'll leave that with you at this time, Deputy Mayor, if you wanted to add anything. Thanks. Was there any additional questions on any items of correspondence from any members of council? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. There are one item for committee and board minutes. The recommendation that the minutes of the following meetings be received. It's from the Committee of Adjustment on the 7th of December. Can I have a motion to receive, please? Councillor Andrews and Deputy Mayor Taylor. Was there any questions on that item? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Item 15 is a notice of motion prior to meeting, which I submitted. I'll just read it off here quick. It's from Mayor Post regarding board appointments. The recommendation is whereas council appointments to various boards need to be amended from time to time. Therefore, be it resolved that council accept Councillor Prendergast's resignation from the Credit Valley Conservation Board due to scheduling conflicts, and that Councillor Stevens be added to the Credit Valley Conservation Board, and that Councillor Stevens be removed from the Orangeville Public Library Board, and that Councillor Andrews be added to the Orangeville Public Library Board. Can I have a seconder to my motion, please? Councillor Andrews, was there any questions or comments on this item? Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Mayor Post. I would just like to say that regretfully, I had to step down due to scheduling conflicts, and the CVC is near and dear to my heart, and I'm still going to follow closely what happens on that board. Thank you.
We'll make sure Councillor Stevens reports back. Was there any, did I call the vote? No, I didn't yet. Can I have a vote, please? All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Was there any notices of motion at tonight's meeting? Seeing none. Any items of new business? Councillor Andrews.
Sounded like it was Darth Vader for a second. Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to take 30 seconds, maybe 45, to congratulate the 10 businesses who are part of the Business Accelerator Program through the My Main Street initiative. This was, of course, processed through our ED office. I want to take the time to thank Christine Hahn, as well as Mark Jameson and Ruth Phillips. The 10 recipients received valuable marketing information. Mr. Osmond was also on hand today for the congratulatory get-together. Some incredible investment, but more importantly, the tenacity and the resiliency of some of these people who've opened up their businesses in our community, especially during the pandemic. Many names that have been highlighted. I'll just name 3: Bluebird Cafe, Paint Your Own Pottery, Thistle and Rose, just to name a few, and many others. We had 10 in total who are the recipients of $10,000 each, to a total of $100,000 to help them out in their progress in our community. So again, it was a great event, but more importantly, I want to just conclude by thanking them for investing in our community.
Wonderful. Thank you, Councillor Andrews, for highlighting those. Was there any additional items of new business? Councillor Stevens.
Through your worship, I received some emails about my free transit comments. And I just want to set the record straight that I want Orangeville to have transit. I just didn't like the taxpayers having to pay for it. So that's a big difference. So, but I did receive some negative feedback.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Yeah, welcome to council. Was there any additional items of new business from any members of council? Seeing none, we're at the time in our agenda where it is question period. I'm going to start with if there's any members on the phone. Was there any members connecting by phone who wish to speak at public question period? If there's someone on the line who wishes to speak, I see that there is one caller. You're reminded to just press *6 to mute and unmute, and I'll allow you the first crack at question period. Again, it's *6 to mute and unmute. Okay, we will turn it over to anybody in the gallery. Is there any members of the gallery wishing to ask a question at question period? Mr. Gristow, if you can just have a seat, state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Post, good evening, everyone. Member of the council, member of staff, and members of the gallery, and those that they're probably watching this at home. I have a couple of requests here to make. One is I would like to see a public meeting held when those water meters come to the forefront of this council that they're supposed to be changing. So
Sorry, Mr. Gristow, I couldn't hear you. When what comes to council?
when those water meters comes to council for approval to be changed, I like
I believe that they're coming forward now because it.
Well, I don't.
Mr. Koslak, I'll just turn it over to you quickly because I don't believe it's coming back to council.
Yeah, through your worship, I think all the approvals have been given to be able to proceed with the work. At this time, I don't believe there's any need to come back to council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Koslak.
Is that means they already been approved
Yes, it's already been approved
by who? The previous council?
by previous council. Yeah.
That's interesting. No public meetings. Here we are. We're gonna be probably spending close to almost $8 million for the project. To me, that's insane. Already the water and sewer rates in this town, they are out of whack. And here we are, we're gonna spend close to $8 million to put these meters, the new meters in, for the sake to have a mini computer to be read. You can hire a lot of people with the money for many years to come to go around and read those meters. I'm no stranger to this issue because I fought this issue many years ago when they first came to the forefront. Unfortunately, I lost my vote. After 2 terms, I kept them off from putting them in. But then on the last term, because a member of the council over the day, she got elected. She put the motion on the floor, and it was a 6-1 decision to proceed.
Yeah, and it's been approved, Mr.
Okay, and it's been approved then. But I certainly don't want to see another, like I stated, close to $7-8 million spent. And guess who's going to pay for it? Me and the rest of the taxpayer in this town through water and sewer rates. That is insane. Totally insane. Okay.
Any additional questions? We've got.
The other question I have is tomorrow night is my understanding that there is a budget discussion.
That's correct.
Unfortunately, the question period is at the end. By the time probably the budget, it's already approved. So my comments here tonight, I would like to see a recorded vote tomorrow night on the budget. I'll leave it with you, Mayor Post, Deputy Mayor Taylor, and the rest of the council. I think the people deserve that to see where council votes on the budget with an increase. Thank you. Have a nice night.
Thank you, Mr. Gristow. Was there any other members of the public wishing to speak at question period? You can just have a seat, make sure the mic is on, state your name and address for the record, please, and your 2 minutes will begin.
My name is Anthony Zambito. I live at 71st Street. Zammer Live, first of all, I would like to commend council tonight on their decision to revoke the COVID vaccine mandate that was still in effect, specifically for the firefighters tonight. I think we've come a long way ever since COVID was first introduced into our communities back in early 2020. And I think tonight's vote and the fact that we had so many people from the town here tonight really reflects how far we've come. My questions tonight pertain going back to the discussions we had in recent weeks in regards to free fare and the possibility of implementing a transit system at night to service the patrons of Orangeville in the late hours, especially on weekends. So over the past few weeks, you know, Ms. Post, you made reference to how the goal of the free fare project is to, you know, incentivize transit or people to utilize transit. Has there ever been any work done, or has there ever been any research into whether or not there's a demand for a late night service at Orangeville late hours?
There has been. I'll actually turn over to Deputy Mayor Taylor, who sat on the transit committee for 2 terms, I believe, looking at items like that and can discuss that a little further. Deputy Mayor, and I'll pause your time so you do still have time.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So there was studies done. The main thrust of it is there wasn't enough ridership to warrant it. I think, you know, I have to even go with memory serves. I think we did actually run a test to be able to see if that happened as well, but there was either a survey or a test and the ridership was it just didn't make sense to do it. And one of the complaints at the time, or the concerns, was young people with jobs in the city. So if you're working at McDonald's or what have you, the local bar, how do you get home if you don't have a ride, that sort of thing, because our town just doesn't have that as an opportunity. So that was the problem that we were trying to solve, because it wasn't going to be, as I recall, you were talking about late night bars and that sort of thing. It wasn't going to be that late. It was more about hitting this, and I'm going by memory, it was like a 9-10 o'clock threshold. So it wasn't going to answer what you were asking 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Mr. Zambito.
Yeah, thank you. No, the reason why I asked is because, yeah, I was on the bars again this evening, and again, to find a ride home, it was a bit difficult. So again, thank you for your time. I just wanted to hear if there was discussion on that.
Thank you very much, and we will continue to have the discussion about transit. It's an ongoing concern that we have, and we hear from restaurant owners and bar owners all the time that they're struggling to get cabs at the end of the evening as well. And having worked in the restaurant business myself several years ago, it was always a concern then as well. So we are looking at ways to try and solve it, whether it's through Uber or taxis or looking at our transit in a different way. So thank you for being here. Appreciate your comments. Thank you. Was there any additional questions from any members of the public tonight? Seeing none. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Again, same rules. Have a seat. State your name. State your address.
19 Cedar Drive, Rick Ugolini. I just have a couple of questions to do with the budget. Now, water, wastewater. How does wastewater happen? Or like, is it just stuff that goes down from the streets? Now it seems that wastewater is going crazy over top of water. Now, all these proposed or these townhomes that are being built, all the green space is being eaten up, and there's nowhere for the water to go but down the drain, like the roads and that. So that creates more wastewater. Is that correct?
Mr. Koslak, I'll turn it over to you to explain water and wastewater.
Through your worship, I think one of the big changes in newer developments, they're constructed with storm sewers also, so it doesn't go into the sanitary system. So when you have stormwater, if an area is paved over, it would go into the storm system. And then we'd have a stormwater pond that would treat the water before it's released out to the environment. It wouldn't go to the sewage treatment plant, so it shouldn't affect the flows at the plant.
Okay, I didn't know that. So it was kind of bothering me. Like, it seems every time something's built here in town, I have to pay for it instead of developers. Like,
that's one of the benefits of development charges. And the idea behind development charges is that growth will pay for its growth. And unfortunately, with some of the new bills being introduced by the province, they're looking at changing that mix. I could leave it to Mr. Ward to explain a whole bunch about that if he wanted to. But the reality is that that's kind of the future, which is put on us by the province, which is that municipalities are going to have to pay for a lot of that growth that used to come from development charges.
Now, dealing with wastewater again, is there bylaws in this town saying you can only have so much of your lot paved or concreted? Because I've driven by homes that the whole front yard is paved.
There are regulations, and I don't know who wants to take that question, Mr. Ward.
Through you, your worship, there is zoning bylaw that does regulate coverage in terms of building footprint. It's a bit rare for the bylaw to go one step further and regulate impervious or hard surface area beyond buildings. There may be some site-specific areas where that's a significant concern, and thus there's a need to have further regulation around that. But by and large, it's just with respect to building coverage.
Because
there is regulation about widening your driveways to cover your whole lawn and things like that that would not be permitted, correct?
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
you see it all over town. The whole front yard is paved.
And that our bylaw department is run on a complaint-driven basis. So if you do see that, you can always put a call into the bylaw department and they'll go out and investigate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. Was there any additional questions from the members of the gallery? Seeing none.
Send out the Nazi brigade.
Pardon me?
Can we please?
Was there somebody on the line who wished to ask a question? You can hit *6 to unmute. One additional time, *6 to unmute if you wish to ask a question. Okay, we will move on to item 19, which is bylaws. There is a recommendation that the bylaws listed below be read 3 times and finally passed. 19.1 is a bylaw to amend traffic bylaw 78-2005 with respect to closure and access agreements for Survey Lane. And lastly, 19.2 is a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of tonight's council meeting, January 23rd. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Sherwood and Councillor McIntosh. Any questions or comments? I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Next, I need a motion to adjourn. Deputy Mayor Taylor? Yes? Okay, thank you. And Councillor Stevens, all in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Have a good night. We will see you tomorrow night for our budget at 7 p.m.